Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Black Talk Platform, where this is June 4th and we are celebrating Black Music Month. I am excited. We've done this before. I believe we've done it twice before. Last year, I had live artists in the studio to celebrate their work. But this year, I wanted to go a little deeper and I wanted to think about theory and connectivity from Africa, the continent, and those of us who have been brought over to the Americas via the transatlantic slave trade. And I wanted to speak with an expert from his vantage point. For me, as a Black woman, for me, as a Black woman raised in the South, in Alabama to be specific, music has always been central to my life. Whether I was a child and enjoying the summer with my family and my friends, or during difficult times in my life, in the lives of my family, and just in times of sorrow, in times when I needed to be encouraged, music has always been central in my life. And even as it relates to being able to be encouraged, being empowered, being having a sense of healing and cleansing, all of that. And I believe I'm not alone when I say that. For Black people, music is as central to our culture and our traditions, which vary, as is eating. Many of us enjoy eating on Sundays a soul food meal or any other times when we are able to get together. Well, for me, music is as important as the food that we break bread around with our family in fellowship. So I brought on today, he is here for the second time on Black Talk Platform, none other than Dr. I'm going to do my best. Karanja Keita Carrol, and he is a distinguished professor at Baruch College, a part of the City University of New York, here in New York. And I'm very happy to have him here with me. And I pray that I pronounced your name right as I bring you on screen, Dr. Carroll.
Good afternoon, everyone. Uh, Karanja, Keita, Carol. So you got it right. I'm happy to be here. Happy to share with you some thoughts and ideas around Black music, its importance. Um, I think to start though, I'd like to talk about the title for today
Yeah.
because that title is important. The title is, feeding the mind, body, and soul.
Mhm.
Um, and this idea of music feeding the mind mentally, feeding our bodies physically, feeding the soul spiritually is something that I believe is is reflective of the African world view. It's reflective of how African people have understood the function of music, the function of art. It is not merely something physical. It is something that connects us deep at our spiritual essence, but it also should give us direction mentally. And when you and I went back and forth talking about this title, I thought it was really important for the folks who are listening and watching to understand that when we're talking about Black music, we're talking about all genres of Black music that contribute to the whole being, to our whole selves, to our whole entire reality, so that we are like using music to heal ourselves, because we have a lot of healing that we need to do. We live in the midst of white supremacy. We live in the midst of all these mechanisms that attempt to destroy us, and it has been our music that has been able to get us through. As Marimba Ani would say, it's been our spirituality that has been able to get us through. But our spirituality has been fundamentally linked to our music. I just want to start there as a foundation,
Mhm.
because I think we can talk all about music and lose the very essence of what our music is fundamentally concerned with. It's concerned with our ability to be healed, to be transformed at a spiritual level, at a mental level, and at a physical level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oops. Oop, oop, oop. What am I doing? Okay. Okay. Yes, absolutely, Dr. Carroll. And yes, Dr. Carroll and I went back and forth. He shot over several different topics, and I believe we landed here because, as he just said, music is more than just bopping, right? It is essential to our healing internally. It's really deep. The expressions of music, the different types of music, and I just wanted to add a little something to the conversation so that we can understand in this white supremacy nation of the United States that we are living in and throughout the world, even, it's important to understand a few things. So, one of the questions or one of the topics I said to Dr. Carroll I want to talk about was gospel spirituals. As many of you know, I am deeply entrenched in the Christian church, and I'll be talking about how I don't consider myself a part of Christianity because I see it as an extension of the oppression of Black peoples, right? And it's really interesting, a note that I'm going to share with you all from the Library of Congress, if you just bear with me, about Negro spirituals. You can go to their website and you will see what I've written or what I've captured from their site. And this is what's really important. It says that the Library of Congress defines Negro spirituals as a type of religious folk song closely associated with the enslavement of African people in the American South. The the songs proliferated in the last few decades of the 18th century, leading up to the abolition or the abolishment of legalized slavery in the 1860s. It goes on to talk about different types of songs and how many of these songs we were taught that they were evil, and that the music, because of the way it was expressed and demonstrated by our ancestors, was somehow evil and should not be commended or celebrated. And we've come from that point in time to this present day where the music has gone from those spirituals that really helped our ancestors to manage during enslavement. Those songs like Sweet Low Swing Chariot, those come right out of biblical thoughts, because those of us who believe that Christ is coming back for his people, we believe that we are his people, that we always were his people, and that we will be carried off. That's a biblical reference. And so when you fast forward, Dr. Carroll, to 2023, you have artists who have in my opinion, mastered the call and response that grows out of gospel spirituals or Negro spirituals, such as artists like Kirk Franklin. Many of his songs have that call and response appeal. One of my favorite groups is Commissioned, and some of you may be familiar with them, headed by Fred Hammond. A lot of their songs, if not all of them, I'll say a lot or most of their songs are biblically based and tied to specific scriptures. But I still see that modern gospel music has been disconnected to this feeling of how we get over or needing to get over. When you think about the crime that is rampant in not only large cities like ours, Dr. Carroll, or where we work, but throughout Black communities, even throughout the world. Why aren't we still making music about that? And we've actually traded that for all of this, what we consider to be praisey type music, but forgetting about the sufferings of our people. Can you weigh in on that for me, for us all, please?
So, speaking of spirituals, I think that we should understand that the well, to go back a little bit, I was raised in the church. Okay, so I am very familiar with gospel music, and I relied upon gospel music, and still rely upon gospel music to get me through some moments. But I think in regards to Negro spirituals, we have to understand that a good portion of those Negro spirituals might have come off as if they were connected to Christian theology, but they were actually talking about getting free. They were actually talking about resistance.
Mhm,
And, just as, other folks throughout the African world use Western religious structures to mask the work that they were trying to do, that's what I believe we were doing with Negro spirituals. And I think when you ask about what's going on today as it relates to contemporary gospel music, I think that we have to realize that, the prophetic theology of the 50s, 60s is not here. We have a money making theology. We
mhm,
have a capitalist infused theology. And
mhm.
therefore, that then impacts the type of music that is created within the contemporary gospel scene. It's not concerned with trying to explain the situation that we're in and show how we got through it in the past and how we're going to get through it in the future. Now, this doesn't mean that it's across the board that every gospel singer is not connected to this tradition. But I think that some of the popular folks are the ones that have a way of not digging as deeply as they can. I mean, like I haven't listened to Kirk Franklin in a minute, but I know that every once in a while I might get a song from him on an album. And I was like, he's got a message there, a message that is beyond Christian theology. And when he hits those, that's the important stuff for me, because like I can argue with theology, but I can't argue with an analysis of the society that we're in and how we can use that to make sense of it and figure out what solutions look like. But again, this for me is just the difference between the type of um, Christianity that Black folks are caught up in today, which is very different from what we were trying to do years ago. I mean, when you think about Black liberation theology, I
Mhm.
have a few people that come to mind, but I can't drop a whole bunch of names of preachers who are doing that work. And the preachers who do that work are the ones that are dealing with the situation that we're talking about, and then also having us think about solutions.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm glad you made that analogy. And also to clarify even what I may have said, you did say when it are those infrequent times that you may hear something drop by Kirk Franklin, for whatever it's worth, if it helps in moving us forward or healing in any way, then it's useful. But we won't make the mistake of believing that it's detached from the commercially driven types of music that we call gospel today. And it is very much detached from a sense of liberation that we still are in search of.
That's right.
We may not be in physical chains any longer, but our minds, and that's why your topic, feeding the mind, body, and soul, is so important. And I always used to tell my children when they were growing up, they're young adults now, and I'm hard pressed to get them to listen on this in this regard. You have to guard your ear gates. Everything that's out there, you cannot allow into your spirit, because it becomes somewhat attached to that same spirit and even your soul. And so, while I love different types of music, all types of music, and we're not necessarily talking about country music today, but that comes right out of the African American experience too. We just sort of abandon it, I suppose, or yet perhaps the dominant society just took it, as they often take things from us and call it their own. But if you don't have these type of dialogues, you'll never know the deep roots that we have in literally every genre of music that has become mainstream today. Dr. Carroll, before we go on, I just wanted to respond to my sister, who has a question. She says, please clarify what you mean about Christianity versus being Christian and a follower of Christ. Well, so Juanita, I don't consider myself to be a part of the institutionalized um, um, notion of Christianity. I have studied, I have seen with my eyes how it further destroys Black people. Christianity, that is a thought, and it has very little, if any at all, to do with what we hold dear within the Bible. And it's certainly a discussion I'm willing to have, but that was for clarity to try to respond to your question. Um, I've said so many times I won't give up the word Christian because it is found in the Bible, but Christianity, it is not. It is just like if Dr. Carrol and I decided right now today we're going to begin something, and we call it Black music, for those who are in search of music for the mind, body, and soul. And we start getting a lot of people who become attached to this new thing that we are institutionalizing, but it doesn't have a basis in a foundation that it speaks of. And that is why I reject this organized Christianity. In my opinion, it has destroyed more of our people than it has really helped. And so when we fight to keep connection to it, it for me, and in my opinion, it keeps us from becoming those true followers of Christ that is spoken of in the first century. And that's why I teach and I preach from the perspective of the first century believers. And even that same word tells us that we are to hold to the apostles' teaching. Well, when Christianity was formed in the 4th century, it couldn't be less like what the apostles taught. It couldn't be less. I promise you that. And so I'm happy to have that conversation at another time, but I hope for now that satisfied your question. Dr. Carrol.
I want to add something.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Haile Selassie, Emperor of Ethiopia, stated, "We must stop confusing religion and spirituality. Religion is a set of rules, regulations, and rituals created by humans which were supposed to help people grow spiritually. Due to human imperfection, religion has become corrupt, political, divisive, and a tool for power struggle. Spirituality is not theology or ideology." And I think that kind of undergirds the distinction that you're trying to make between Christianity and being a Christian. That because the what is taught through this religion has value. Like I have an issue with the political implications of it and how it's been used by white supremacy to as you state, destroy us and just cause confusion and disruption within us. And you can look at a variety of spiritual systems throughout the world that make the same type of argument because those ideas were prevalent. But it's what happens when that system gets connected to politics and white supremacist ideology where it becomes destructive. And I think that's the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, and I think that was a great quote to share from Haile Selassie. And it also causes us, not just Christianity, but it also causes us to look at a person like a Haile Selassie, right, and say, "Oh, he wasn't a Christian." That, we'll reject the truth of everything you just shared with us about him, and because he's not given to the way we have claimed our faith. And I think that we have to be very careful. I always say I'm on the downside of life. I think I have more years behind me than I do in front of me, but the ones that I have left, I will continue to make sure that I am connected to those things that feed my spirit. There's been so much in hurt and pain, because we grab hold to things that we know nothing about. There was a lady who recently left the church. She didn't pass, but she left the church and she said, I'm Baptist tradition, and I like that. I like our excitement and that prophetic voice that once was,
Right.
as you're referring to, that prophetic voice that once was, that those of us like Dr. Adams who just joined us, we hold on to, and you hear it in our teaching, you hear it in our practice, you hear it everywhere. But a lady said to me, I got to stick with the Baptist. Now, Dr. Adams and I, we're theologians through the seminary, and we were required to know what the Baptist polity was. But the average person in the church has no clue as to what it means to be a Baptist, other than we are more exuberant in our praise and worship than are our Presbyterian or Methodist counterparts, what have you. So I don't, Dr. Adams, I see you in there. We're going to do this discussion together for Deacon Presley one day, but I do want to keep with the theme that you and I discussed, that we talk about tonight, this evening. So thank you, though. I really appreciate that question. I also thank you, Dr. Carrol, for weighing in as you did. So with the music, I think that even if it's not gospel music, and young people are challenged to even look back. I'm always joking with my daughter in particular. Most of you know that this is the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And I'm going a little bit out of order, Dr. Carrol. But if you have been paying attention at all, there is a group of Gen Zs who are mocking the origins of hip hop. And they love to pick on Slick Rick with Lottie Dottie. You can just find it anywhere, a spoof of Lottie Dottie. And we, in our generation, Dr. Carrol, we respect the storyteller, Slick Rick, but they don't. And it's the same way when it comes to music like the Harlem Renaissance. Even in seminary, I had great professors who referred back to it. Even in my master's program over at Brooklyn College, they were able to somehow connect the Harlem Renaissance with urban policy, and planning, urban planning, and the shift away from the Harlem Renaissance, those artists, whether they were poets or musicians, to the removal of Blacks from Harlem, or the removal of Blacks from Central Park, which was once called Seneca Village and populated by prominent Blacks to build Central Park. So let's talk about some of the artists, Dr. Carrol, from during the Harlem Renaissance, and how their legacy, people like Josephine Baker, people like Louis Armstrong, who's not always thought of as being a part of that elite group, people like Duke Ellington and Etta James. Let's talk about their lasting impact and how their impact connects not only with music today, but also with the freeing of our minds, the liberation that we're still in search of. If that makes sense, if that's the type of question you thought I would be asking.
Well, we'll, we'll work it out. um, I mean, I think that to understand Black music, you have to understand that our music is fundamentally about speaking to our realities, explaining our realities, sharing interpretations and insight of our realities. And when you look at the work of the folks that you mentioned, Duke, Louis Armstrong, Ethel Waters, so forth and so on, they all attempted to use their music and use their lyrics to explain, like, what realities we are living in. And that's the beauty of our music. But that is also the beauty of hip hop. That is the beauty of the foundations of hip hop, that I'm not aware of folks making fun of Lottie Dottie. I will look that up when we get off of this. But the beauty of hip hop in its origins was about, these are the conditions that we are living in, and these are our realities, and this is what we deal with. And I think in the midst of the origins of hip hop trying to explain and narrate these realities, they also were able to talk about what change would look like, and what something new and better would look like. And as hip hop has evolved over time, um, just as much as we see the commercialization and the influx of capitalism and shaping gospel music, The
Hmm.
same thing happens within hip hop, and the same thing continued to happen within hip hop when major labels began to take shape and control the type of music that is produced and pushed out within hip hop. It then shapes the narrative. A friend of mine by the name of Jared Ball wrote a book called "I Mix What I Like," and in that book, he outlines how, like, the hip hop industry is connected to internal colonialism. The way in which people can control and shape and take the power, financial,
Hmm.
political power of the artist in order to create and shape and develop a particular narrative. And I know that we started with the Harlem Renaissance, but I think for the younger folks who are listening, they need to understand that there are artists that have a story and have a narrative, and those artists are not just artists from the start of hip hop. Those artists still exist today.
They
All
do.
right, and those are the artists that we need to be listening to. Those are the artists that we need to be engaging. And I'll mention a few of them before we get out of here. But any of my students know that I start all of my classes with music. Every single class that I teach, we start with music. And we start with music for a number of reasons. The first is because I'm trying to pull them in. I'm trying to create a community.
Hmm.
And when we're sharing this listening experience, we can come on in as a collective because we've all experienced that song. And then after that, we're trying to talk about what are the lyrics to the song. We do analysis of lyrics. I tell my students, don't say nothing, write down the lyrics that you hear. As the song plays, write down the lyrics. And when the song is over, I say, all right, take 2 to 3 minutes. Tell me what you think this song is about. And then we regroup and we talk about what happens with this, what happens as it relates to interpretation of this song and its relevance to why we're talking about it. And I can use hip hop artists. I can use hip hop artists who have produced music within the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I don't have to use people from the 80s and 90s because there are current artists who are attempting to analyze the society that we live in. And as they attempt to analyze the society, they use the language, they use the verbal explanations in order to say this is how we live and this is also how we want to live. And that's the beauty of our music. All of our music talks about our conditions, but also talks about how things can be and how things will be. Again, understanding black music as it relates to the mind, body, and soul is about recognizing that we are in a quest for freedom, and our music is a fundamental component of that process. This is why during enslavement they wanted to strip the drums from African people. Okay, because the drum was the heartbeat of the people, the drum was the rhythm of the people, and if you can strip that away from them, you can kill them, you can
Yeah.
destroy them.
Mm.
Okay, and we have not been destroyed because we've been connected to our music, and
Yeah.
a lot of these ideas that I'm sharing with you have come from like my reading of Marimba Ani. Marimba Ani is a former professor of Africana and Puerto Rican studies at Hunter College, and she's done phenomenal work. And one of the pieces that like I love to teach because it connects these ideas of music is a piece entitled "The Implications of African Spirituality." Excuse me, the implications of African American spirituality, and it's in a book entitled "African Culture: The Rhythms of Unity," edited by Malefi Asante and Kariamu Welsh Asante. And in that chapter, Marimba Ani is laying out a good portion of what I'm trying to share with you today. That is that this African way of seeing the world impacts how we approach art, impacts our understanding of music, and therefore we need to think of our relationship with music as a fundamentally spiritual experience. A fundamentally spiritual experience. That is why it's about the mind, body, and the soul. Okay?
Yes.
And if it's a fundamentally spiritual experience, that means that we're trying to use our spirituality to elevate us so that we can work in doing the work that we need to do to move through the midst of the Ma'afa, the midst of this white supremacist structure that we live in. And I would argue, again, circling back to hip hop, I would argue that there are hip hop artists who do this, and those are the ones that we need to be plugging Those are the ones that we need to be concerned with, as opposed to those commercial artists who every once in a while are going to give us a song, a good song. I want the album that starts and ends with some good stuff so that I'm constantly being filled. My cup is constantly being filled as I listen to that music. And again, I don't know if I answered that question the way that you had laid it out, but you went from hip hop to Harlem Renaissance.
Yeah.
So we're gonna try to pull this whole thing together.
Yeah. No, 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 no. All of that was great beef, as for those of you who eat beef. But I'd like to zero in on what you said more than once, that music is fundamentally a spiritual experience. And I've probably never been as eloquent as that in how I describe my love for music and how it's gotten me over, right? How central it is to my being. I cannot imagine. And when you with that life without it, and when you talk about how they removed the drums from us because it was the heartbeat of our souls, and that aspirational piece, and that's what I'm always looking for, an aspirational piece that connects to my soul when I'm looking or listening to music, which is why I love jazz music. I love
Mm-hmm.
jazz music so much. Not only because it's instrumental and I can make up my own words where they're missing, but because it really feeds my spirit. It really feeds my spirit. Any instrument that they desire to use, there could be a brand new artist. And what people don't understand about jazz is that there is a reason for every note that is composed by a jazz artist, and he or she is always willing to tell the story. Now, this is not a black artist, but he's one of my favorite jazz artists. He's a smooth jazz artist, Brian Culberson. And I don't have that many of them who I really like, but I recently saw him at the Apollo. I like to move, I like to dance, and he always infuses his music with our music. His whole band is black, right? Because he, for whatever reason, creates his music in that vein. I don't know his whole backstory, but apart from him, every jazz artist that I've liked and has had a story that's deeply connected to them spiritually, and I connect with that music. So when I think about an artist like, and he's not on our list to discuss, Jonathan Butler from South Africa. Most people know him for the song Sarah Sarah, and then that he was a jazz artist, but he has evolved. His music has evolved to the point where most of his music is of a gospel nature. He still does pure jazz without it being centered in gospel music, but he has evolved to let that be more of his persona now. And I think that's with every artist. So whether you, and the Deacons and I were talking about the Wu-Tang series that has been on Hulu for the last 3 seasons, or they've had 3 seasons of it. And I didn't care. I wasn't like a big fan of Wu-Tang. I always liked ODB. My sister really liked Method Man, but watching that story and seeing their stories come to life, and the way RZA, who's really a genius at what he did with Wu-Tang Clan, right? How he planned for all of their success. And I'm sure the miniseries or the limited series only scratched the surface of all their ups and downs, but it certainly grew out of this great need for their own personal, as family members, and just living a tough life here in New York City, on the island of Staten. It still was liberative. They still knew and understood that we have not made it as a people, and that the fight, the struggle must continue. How There are a couple of questions over here, Dr. Carrol. How do we begin to have these discussions? First of all, I want to say to you, and one of your students was here to say, yes, he does. He starts all of his classes with a song or with music. And I love that process. I may also try to incorporate that into some of my future classes. Juanita says she does the same thing with her graduate students that she teaches. She starts with a song or music. How do we get our young people to hear us when we start talking about stuff they have no connection to because no one has decided to incorporate music of old, artists who have long passed and that only even a few of us remember, love their music. How do we integrate that? And I think, Rodney, that's a part of your question. How do we integrate that not only into these young people's lives, but even into their parents' lives so that music can become central once more for our people?
So, all right. I want to answer that question, but I want to go back to the jazz discussion
Mhm,
because the beauty of instrumental music, I think you touched upon it, but I just want to kind of focus that the beauty of instrumental music, the beauty of jazz music is that lyrics in music direct you which way to go and what to think about. When the lyrics are not there, you are in control of where you're trying to go with the music. And I'm saying this because I listen to all this music off of Impulse Records that's connected to John Coltrane,
mhm,
connected to Pharoah Sanders, connected to McCoy Tyner when I was writing my dissertation. That was the only thing that I did. I just literally got a whole bunch of their music and just played and played and played. And the music kept me moving, all right, but I was able to think freely and move through the ideas that I was trying to explore within the dissertation. And I think sometimes we need to be able to engage with music that doesn't have lyrics because we need to be figuring out where we're trying to go as opposed to allowing those lyrics to direct us. So that's the point that I
love
want
it.
to make. In regards to how do we connect younger folks to potentially older music, one of the things that I do, so I love hip hop music, okay? Hip hop is based upon sampling. So what I do is I, and I usually like run off theme in class when this happens. It's like I'll play a song and I'll realize, oh, I know the sample that came from. I will then play the sample and then I will use that to explain a whole bunch of other things. And in doing so, you're playing the contemporary song, you're then playing the original, and then you're talking about the relationship, and then you get into the history of how we got here and how hip hop does what it needs to do. I do that best with hip hop music, but there's been a few R&B pieces that I've found samples from, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing.
Mhm,
But that's how I do it. Another thing is you have artists that remake songs. So
mhm,
we're all familiar with Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, all right?
mhm,
But
mhm,
there's an artist by the name of Jasiri X who has a rendition of that strange fruit. And a component of the songs is like, I can't remember the lyrics right now, but one of the components in the song that he makes is that at once they used to lynch us and now they shoot us. And
mm,
like by doing that, all right, you then can give them what Jasiri is saying in the last 10 years, and then what Billy was saying from 40, 50, 60 years ago. And in doing so, they understand those connections. I,
mm,
I think for me, like, because I use music for everything. When I wake up in the morning, I put music on. When I'm walking and running and hiking, I have music. So like music is always there for me. But I do believe that it's just important that we are engaging with the right music. That's my thing. John Henry Clark said that everything that touches your soul and your being needs to be an instrument of your liberation.
mm.
And you
I
know,
agree.
this does not mean that I don't listen to ratchet music because every once in a while I might listen to something and be like, "What am I listening to these lyrics for?" You know, I got to stop myself. It's like I don't need to listen to this mess. But the point is that like we should. You said it earlier. Like we need to. I don't know. You guard our ears or something like that. We need to
Mhm.
be mindful of what we put into our being because what we put into our being has a way to impact us if we recognize that relationship between mind, body, and soul. If we acknowledge that there's a connection, that there's these interconnected realities of who we are as African people, we need to be mindful that those lyrics that we think might not be about nothing might impact how we react to something within the future because it's sitting there within our subconscious, within our unconscious, etc.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just wanted to share. It's too big to put up there, but Dr. Adams said that last week she quoted Grandmaster Flash in her sermon on the effects of grind culture on Black women's minds, um, and bodies, and she used music to highlight the deep philosophical truths put forth by our forth by our creative minds. And I think that's really good, Dr. Adams, because we, as Dr. Carrol was just saying, we have to make sure that, like Dr. Clark said, it is keeping us on track to our liberation. The problem, I think, Dr. Carrol, is that so many of us believe that we no longer are in captivity, and therefore that the ratchet music, as you said, the music that doesn't feed the mind, body, or soul is really okay. We have a whole lot of time to mess around with that type of music because there's no liberation that's any longer needed. I don't you know, it's the way we harm each other, right? And the way we continue to be harmed by the government says to me that we don't have time to spend too long around this particular mountain of bad music that doesn't do anything to push us forward. In fact, I would say it keeps us from achieving even small goals that we set for ourselves because we are so distracted by the lives of those people who are producing this music because the industry requires that they do so. Not necessarily that they really are happy about doing it, but they do what they have to do without my judgment being pushed upon them for the reasoning around that they come to do this type of music that doesn't help our community. And I think we have to continue to do the things that you and Dr. Adams and Deacon Juanita were talking about. So let me try to move us forward because I only have Dr. Carol for an hour, everybody. Let me see if I
Let,
can get
let,
this.
let
Go
me
ahead, go ahead.
just really quickly. I mentioned Marimba Ani before, and
Mm-hmm,
I just want to quote her because it kind of speaks to what you're saying about our people not realizing that we are still fighting for our liberation. Marimba says that we say we're in a war, but we ain't doing war. War requires planning, strategy, studying your enemy. They and study us and act accordingly. We are being warred upon. And I think what she's getting at is that you know there's a war being brought to us,
mm-hmm.
and with that war being brought to us, we are not actually realizing that we are at war, and we're just acting as if we're just trying to get my good job so I can pay my bills, and realize that that whole quest for the good job to pay your bills is a part of the war because you're not focused upon the liberation and the work that you need to be doing in regards to your people. It's it's just important. And for me, what I try to do with my students is just have them think critically about who they are, how they got to the place that they're at, and then how do they then think about changing their future and how do they begin to move in a particular direction. And I think once we begin that very simple thing of self knowledge, once we begin to ask those questions, who am I? How did I get here? And where am I trying to go? We then very clearly understand the fact that we are in a war, that these folks are bringing war to us, and we are not prepared. We're fundamentally not prepared. I think about a whole bunch of people who are pressed about diversity, but their understanding of diversity is not a diversity of mind, it's not a diversity of perspective, it's not a diversity of ideology. It is a diversity that's related to color, a
Mm-hmm.
diversity that might be related to gender. But they're choosing, and I'm paraphrasing a quote for Linda James Myers because this is the origin of this idea. But what they are choosing is diversity of people who look different and might be a different gender, but they think just like your oppressor. So that means that we can have black folks in positions of power but they are doing the same things that these white folks are doing, and black people will be duped into thinking that that is change because we get this first black this first black that. And what becomes essential for us, if we recognize that we are at war, is for us to understand that your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. Not all of not all of our people are for us, and
Right.
too many of our people are against us. And we're sitting here following them and praising them as if it's the second coming. I remember when Obama got elected, and I would see these like photos, these like montages of like Obama, Malcolm, and Dr. King, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, what in the world is this? Like, what would Malcolm be thinking? What would the King be thinking? You
Mm-hmm.
know, but if we think that we've reached the promised land because we got a black president, well, what are we fighting for? Why we're not even fighting? We don't need to fight. We should be happy.
I feel like, and he's taken a lot of heat, both Dr. Cornell West and Tavis Smiley, over their very public feud, I suppose, with President Obama. But I remember watching the first election of President Obama um, via Democracy Now, and Dr. West was on the broadcast, also watching, and I listened closely to what President Obama said, and I believe Dr. West did too. But he didn't connect it to what President Obama said. President Obama, it's out there for anyone to go and see. He says, "But you got to make me do it." And in my opinion, the only people who heard him and put into action what he said in terms of making him do it was the LGBTQ community. In other words, if y'all don't come to me, if y'all don't come to me beating down my door, it's not going to happen for you. But you touched on something earlier, and we're still talking about all skin
Mm.
folk and kinfolk. Um, the black faces, and I quote Dr. Julia Hare often, who gave us a definition or a distinction between leading blacks and black leaders. And Danielle Swinton is in the music industry herself. She develops artists, and she said, "Good content. Never heard of just Siri X." I put it in there so that you can look him up. He's a socially conscious artist. He's an activist, and his music is really good. And that's who Dr. Carrol was referring to, having remade Strange Fruit. And so it's artists like the ones that Danielle develops, and Jasiri X, that we will never hear commercially because there is a reason for them staying in, say, the shadows. He's wildly popular in the social justice movement, but most of us don't connect music with justice, and that is a part of it. And so when we're listening to leading blacks, rather than looking for black leaders like Dr. Carroll, Dr. Adams, and others who many of us will never hear about unless you come on a show like this or another show like this. Those are the black leaders, the people who they keep carting out decade after decade after decade are not our black leaders. They have attached themselves to the money. But yet, because they have these huge platforms, we continue to believe that they are addressing the basic needs of Black people, and they're not. And so we have to really stop applauding all these first and give them an opportunity to do something beyond occupying a first position. And when we look back over their track records, then we're able to see whether or not they're a leading Black or a Black leader. And if they're not speaking about the liberation of Black people because we are still not free, then they're going to be in the category of leading Blacks, in my opinion, and rather than Black leaders. We don't have enough time to just want first. We have to desire fundamental change. And one of your student, May Paternal, she has said, I think that there has to be balance. Sometimes everything doesn't have to I can't find your quote because it's way up now, but I think she was just saying everything. Oh, she said everything doesn't have to be about liberating. And I think that's what Dr. Carroll was saying. He will listen to music that's not out of that sphere of liberation. But when we're talking about how much time we spend with music. And if the majority of our time is spent with music that doesn't feed our soul, then we're going to have the problem. We're not going to be able to respond quickly. And I'm not speaking for him, I'm just responding to what you said. We're not going to be able to respond quickly to the desperate needs that we have as a people if everything that's going in doesn't feed the soul. You can have a little bit that slips in. I like a little bit to slip in as well, but that's not where I stay. I'm very conscious of the state that we find ourselves in here. And so therefore I need the instrumentals. I did the same thing with the John Coltrane. I really did while I was trying to get through my dissertation. I couldn't watch no TV because TV doesn't really build our souls either, right? So I had to turn that off. I couldn't clean my house. This is the dance, right? While you're trying to do your master's thesis or your dissertation, you have to really shut it down. And that's what I did as well. There's some really great posts in here. I'm going to try to get them into the broadcast for those who will come back and watch it again, and they'll be able to see what you all are saying. But in these last 10 minutes, and if there are any questions for Dr. Carrol, drop them in there, and I will most definitely get him to get them in front of him. I wanted to talk about Stevie Wonder, who is one of my favorites, probably a lot of people's favorites. And Langston Hughes, who was another favorite out of the Harlem Renaissance period, but as a poet, more or less, right? While Stevie Wonder, we all consider him a musical genius. I believe it was Eddie Murphy who said it in his stand-up. He started calling him a musical genius. I think about Langston Hughes's poems, and then I see how his candor in his poetry, and then Stevie Wonder's poetry in song sort of have some symmetry. And then I think I said to you, Dr. Carrol, I also think of artists like Arrested Development. Everyday People wasn't an original, but there was a community aspect, in my opinion, to their music, as well as Songs in the Key of Life from Stevie Wonder, right? That brings forth my favorite song, As. He's talking about love. And then, of course, we have the Mighty OJs, right? In their family reunion song, trying to wrap it all up in terms of how we connect body, mind, and soul to Black music. Do you have anything to say about any of those artists that I mentioned, and any that you may want to add, Dr. Carrol?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's anything specific that I have about any of the artists that you mentioned. They're all wonderful artists. So there's no question about that. I would add some others to consider. I would add some contemporary artists, such as a group called the Sufferers. They have a beautiful song entitled "How Do We Heal." Um, we don't need to play it, but
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
say that the song is entitled "How Do We Heal," and the group is the Sufferers, featuring Sun Little and Bryce the Third. A beautiful song that is a social analysis about the society that we live in, about dealing with these conflicts with the police and the unnecessary murder of our people by the police. There's another group that I love to listen to entitled Fertile Ground. They have a beautiful album entitled Black Is, and on that album they have a beautiful song called You. And it's to me it's a ballad. There's other artists that I love. A sister by the name of Narubi Salah. She's a hip hop artist. A beautiful song, beautiful lyric. Like I'm a lyrics person. Like I want to be able to hear this wordplay and you put it together. And she does beautiful things with her music. Another artist that I value is someone by the name of Wise Intelligent. He's another rapping hip hop artist. So there are people out there who are doing this work. And like you said, when you were mentioning Jasiri, that, these aren't mainstream, but if you understand what happens within the mainstream, if you understand how your project can be controlled, manipulated, and shifted to do something that you don't want it to
Right.
do,
Right.
these people don't need to be in the mainstream. It's just that we have to know that these artists exist and we have to play them and we have to share them. And when we have platforms like this, We introduce people to these artists.
Yeah.
That I could go on, but there are a variety of folks. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. There's a group by the name of Salt, SAULT. SAULT, out of the UK, and they do beautiful, 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 beautiful music. And there's artists who are doing these things, and I think that we need to be mindful that these artists exist, and we should support those artists. I had the chance to when I was teaching in upstate New York to have Jasiri X come to the school and talk to the students, and it's amazing to hear this brother, like you said, who's committed to social justice. He's based out of Pittsburgh and has a variety of different mechanisms in which he's trying to transform, make change within his community. But he also stretches outside of that, and those are the artists that I think are influential, are powerful, and have the ability to give a message to young folks that they are able to receive. I think sometimes when we try to throw at them some old school stuff, they're not trying to hear it. And I can understand. There was a time in my life when I wasn't respectful of the good music that came out of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But as I got older, it's like, oh yeah, this stuff is good. But also, I, being a student and the child of hip hop allows me to reflect and respect that older stuff. And when folks don't know about the history of hip hop and they think that hip hop is just about making some beats on a beat machine, that's not it.
It's not
That's not
it.
it.
That's not it. I'm happy to say that when you mentioned the group Salt, my daughter, who's like I told you, she's a young adult, she's like, yes, 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 yes. And a specific song that she likes by them is called Masterpiece. Masterpiece. So I'm happy she's sitting here listening to you. I think I told you she's in college. And B, that she is actually listening to artists that we are not always, I've never heard of them before you said it, and then she's over here like, yeah, yeah. So we're not, our young people are not lost because they are still listening. It is just for us to have these kind of conversations, to invite a Jasiri X to a classroom to present to his generation, to the younger generation, and let them know that there are other options to the commercialized music that is parading around as Black music and is not necessarily so, and has no connection to our struggle, to our history, to our today, to help build us, to feed our minds, our bodies, and our souls. And listen, I'm so happy for everyone who has participated by dropping songs in the chat for us to go back and listen to. I saw a lot of Anita Baker in there, maybe not a lot, but enough to make us want to go and pull out Body and Soul. Thank you. Thank you so much. And my sister recently saw her over in Jersey, I believe, and she still has it. And a lot of our artists still have it. And we want to celebrate them while they are yet with us, as well as look intentionally for those who are speaking the language that connects us to each other, mind, body, and soul. And I want to give Dr. Carrol the last word. I wasn't sure Reels for TV who you were saying blocked you, because I'm constantly putting up your tweets. And look, he's just given, or she's just given us a list of great artists. I love George Benson. Shanice Wilson. Now, I just let my daughter listen to this song that she sang with Kenny Loggins. I don't know if any of you all remember Kenny Loggins, but there was this song by that she did. She was a feature on, and Shanice Wilson's rather, is so much more than I Love Your Smile. This young woman can sing, and I call her young because she's a few years younger than me. She is a wonderful artist and very rarely thought of as such. Phyllis Hyman, the great late Phyllis Hyman. Wiz Khalifa. So now I'm going to go and listen a little bit more to his music, and he's telling us that they are all from Pittsburgh. So
Mhm.
Jasiri is in good company out there. I love me some George Benson. I'm trying to go see him very soon. I've seen him once, but I want to see him again before he retires or whatever. Dr. Carrol, thank you so much for spending this hour with me. Let me give you the last word. And we welcome everybody back to the next Black Talk platform broadcast in the future.
The only thing that I need to say is that we ain't mentioned Donny Hathaway.
Oh my. We did not. We did
we
not.
we we yeah. So I'm gonna end off by saying we should all listen to some Donny Hathaway because Donny Hathaway gave us the whole picture.
Mm,
Okay, he gave us love, he
mhm,
gave us struggle, he gave us love, he gave us struggle, and
mm,
that's the reality of the situation that we're in. We need love, but we need to realize that we are struggling. And I mean, I use Donnie in a variety of different ways in my classes, and he don't miss a beat, and he has a way of touching my students in a way that I can then just move right into the next topic. But yeah, Donnie Hathaway. That's where how I'm gonna leave it. I appreciate you, Dr. Jenkins. I'm thankful that I'm able to come on here and chop it up with you. We'll figure out the next time that I'm on, and we'll figure out another topic that we can talk about. I'm always willing to come and chat with you because it's an open environment. The
yes,
folks in the comment section are always on point.
they
So
are.
it's like family, it's like community, and that's what this is about. It's
That's what
about
it's
trying to have a communal conversation. Not that we agree on everything, but that we hear different opinions, different
about.
perspectives, and make change about how we're going to move after we've had these discussions. So I want to thank you, Dr. Jenkins, and I want to tell everyone to have a good Sunday, and I'm going to try to do the same. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.